She entered the billionaire's room, and he froze when she whispered, "I've never done this." "Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start." The brass elevator doors of the Grand Manhattan Hotel slid open with a whisper, revealing the opulent 42nd floor that most people would never see. Evangeline Eva Winters stepped out, her housekeeping cartwheels rolling silently across marble floors that cost more per square foot than she made in 6 months. The hallway stretched before her like a golden canyon, lined with doors that led to suites where the world's elite played their games of power and money. Eva had learned to move through these halls like a ghost, invisible, efficient, silent. At 23, she had perfected the art of being unseen. Her uniform was always pristine, her movements calculated to avoid drawing attention. She knew exactly which routes took her past the fewest security cameras, which service elevators the guests never used, and most importantly, how to clean a room so thoroughly that it appeared untouched while leaving no trace of her presence. "Morning, Eva," whispered Carmen, another housekeeper, as they passed in the hallway. Carmen was 15 years older, with tired eyes that held stories Eva didn't want to hear. "You got the penthouse circuit again?" Eva nodded, adjusting her grip on the cart handle. The penthouse circuit, suites 4201 through 4210, was considered the most demanding assignment. These weren't just rooms, they were sanctuaries for people who lived in a different universe. People who spent more on breakfast than Eva's grandmother spent on groceries for a month. "Lucky you," Carmen muttered, but her tone suggested anything but luck. Eva understood. The penthouse circuit meant longer hours, higher standards, and zero tolerance for mistakes, but it also meant better tips when the guests bothered to leave them and overtime pay that helped cover her grandmother's medication costs. She pushed her cart towards Suite 4207, checking her watch. 1:47 p.m. Perfect timing. The guest in 4207 had maintained the same schedule for exactly 1 week now. Housekeeping request sign on the door at 1:30 p.m. sharp, meetings from 2:00 p.m. to 6:00 p.m., sign removed by 7:00 p.m., like clockwork. Eva had never seen him, this mysterious occupant of Suite 4207, but she knew him through the details he left behind. His name was on the registration, Dashiell Blackthorne. The newspapers in his room spoke of tech acquisitions and billion-dollar deals. His coffee cups told her he worked late into the night, always black coffee, always 2 cups, always left on the mahogany desk beside perfectly organized documents that she was careful never to disturb. He was neat, almost obsessively so. His shirts hung in the closet with mathematical precision, sorted by color and fabric. His shoes were aligned like soldiers. Even his toiletries in the bathroom were arranged with the kind of order that spoke of a man who controlled every aspect of his life. The housekeeping sign hung on the door handle like a small flag of surrender, giving her permission to enter his domain. Eva knocked twice, hotel protocol, waited 3 seconds, then used her master key. "Housekeeping," she called softly into the silence, another protocol that protected both her and the guests from awkward encounters. Silence answered her, as it had every day for the past week. The suite was magnificent, even by Grand Manhattan standards. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, where tiny figures moved like ants, 42 stories below. The living area featured leather furniture that probably cost more than Eva would make in 2 years, and a dining table that could seat 8 but had never been used. Eva began her routine with practiced efficiency. She changed the sheets with hospital corners that would make a military officer proud, replaced the towels with fresh ones warmed in the service cart, and cleaned the bathroom until every surface gleamed. She worked with the kind of focused attention that came from knowing that a single complaint could cost her this job. As she dusted the desk, her eyes inevitably fell on the documents spread across its surface. She couldn't help but notice the letterheads, major tech companies, investment firms, names she recognized from business news that played in the hotel's employee break room. Whatever Dashiell Blackthorne was doing in New York, it was big. There was something else on the desk that caught her attention, a framed photograph, small and tucked slightly behind a stack of contracts. It showed a much younger version of what must be Dashiell Blackthorne, standing next to an elderly man in front of a modest house with a Blackthorne Electronics repair sign. Both men were smiling, their arms around each other's shoulders, and something about the genuine joy in their expressions made Eva pause. This wasn't the cold corporate world she'd expected to find traces of. This was personal, human. She quickly looked away, focusing on her work. Getting emotionally invested in the lives of guests was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had her own problems, her grandmother's medical bills, her student loan payments, the constant worry about making ends meet. The last thing she needed was to start caring about the personal life of a billionaire who would never even notice she existed. But as she finished cleaning and prepared to leave, Eva found herself glancing once more at that photograph. There was something about the warmth in it that stayed with her, a reminder that even people who lived in worlds of unimaginable wealth had once been someone's son, someone's family. She was almost at the door when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside, heavy, confident steps that belonged to someone who owned every room they entered. Eva's heart jumped. The guest was returning early. She froze, her hand on the door handle, listening as the footsteps paused right outside Suite 4207. This had never happened before. The schedule had been perfect, predictable, safe. The footsteps moved past the door and continued down the hallway. Eva released a breath. She didn't realize she'd been holding. False alarm. But something had changed in that moment of fear. For the first time since she'd started working the penthouse circuit, Eva had felt the fragility of the invisible barrier that separated her world from theirs. She was a ghost, haunting the spaces between their lives. But ghosts, she realized, could be discovered. As she gathered her supplies and prepared to leave, Eva couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed routine was about to shatter. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the practical concerns about keeping her job and maintaining her invisibility, a small part of her wondered what it would be like to be seen, to be noticed by someone like Dashiell Blackthorne, who lived in a world where problems were solved with money and power, where photographs of happier times sat on mahogany desks in 42nd floor suites. Eva shook her head, dismissing the foolish thought. She was Evangeline Winters, invisible housekeeper. He was Dashiell Blackthorne, billionaire. Their worlds might occupy the same physical space for these few weeks, but they would never, could never, truly intersect. She pushed her cart toward the elevator, already planning tomorrow's schedule. Same time, same routine, same careful invisibility. She had no way of knowing that tomorrow everything would change. Dashiell Blackthorne stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 38th floor of the Meridian Tower, watching the chaos of Manhattan traffic 40 floors below. At 31, he had built an empire that spanned 3 continents. But today, staring at the maze of yellow cabs and hurried pedestrians, he felt more isolated than ever. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, sharp jawline, dark hair that cost more to maintain than most people's monthly rent, and eyes that his competitors described as calculatingly cold. The tailored charcoal suit he wore was custom-made in Milan, and his watch could have bought a decent car. To the world, he was the embodiment of success. But Dash knew the truth. Success was a beautifully constructed prison, and he had built every bar himself. "Mr. Blackthorne?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Patterson Group meeting has been moved to 4 o'clock. Should I reschedule your hotel arrangements?" Dash glanced at his Patek Philippe watch. 1:15 p.m. He had planned to be back at the Grand Manhattan by 1:30 to remove the housekeeping sign before his 2 p.m. video conference with the Los Angeles office. The routine had become sacred to him, one of the few things in his chaotic New York schedule that remained under his complete control. "No changes needed, Jennifer. I'll make it work." He gathered his documents and headed for the elevator, his mind already shifting to the afternoon's challenges. The Patterson acquisition was crucial for his East Coast expansion, but the negotiations had hit several snags. His legal team was confident they could push through, but Dash had learned never to count on anything until contracts were signed and money transferred. The ride down 38 floors gave him exactly 90 seconds to transition from one version of himself to another. In the office, he was the decisive CEO who never showed weakness. In the hotel, he was the controlled guest who maintained perfect boundaries. Each role required its own mask, its own carefully calculated performance. His driver was waiting outside with the black Mercedes sedan, engine running. "The Grand Manhattan, sir?" "Yes." "And Marcus?" Dash looked up from his phone. "Take the long route. I need 15 minutes to prepare for the LA call." As Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows, Dash allowed himself a moment of honesty. He was exhausted. Not physically, his personal trainer made sure he maintained peak condition, but emotionally, spiritually, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix and money couldn't buy away. When had his life become such a performance? When had every conversation become a negotiation? Every relationship a potential liability, every moment of genuine feeling a weakness to be hidden. He thought about the photograph on his hotel room desk, the one of him and his grandfather standing outside the tiny electronics repair shop where it all began. Walter Blackthorne had taught him everything about building something from nothing, about the value of honest work and treating people with dignity. But Walter had died before seeing what his grandson's empire would become, before witnessing how success could transform a person into someone barely recognizable. "Oh gosh, would you be proud of me now, Grandpa?" Dash whispered to his reflection in the car window. The Mercedes pulled up to the Grand Manhattan's discreet VIP entrance. Dash nodded to the doorman, Richard, who had worked there for 12 years and whose daughter was starting college in the fall. These were the details Dash remembered, the human connections that reminded him he was still capable of seeing people as more than business assets. The elevator to the 42nd floor was empty, giving him another moment of solitude. He loosened his tie slightly and rolled his shoulders, trying to release some of the tension that had become his constant companion. The hallway stretched before him, plush and silent, a golden corridor that led to his temporary sanctuary. Suite 4207 represented something precious to Dash, control. Here, he could predict every detail. The housekeeping sign would be gone by now, removed by the invisible staff member who maintained his space with clockwork precision. The room would be perfect, exactly as he liked it, exactly as he needed it to be for his important calls. But as he approached his door, Dash froze. The small brass sign still hung from the handle, its simple message, "Housekeeping requested." Suddenly feeling like an accusation, he had forgotten. In his rush to leave for the Patterson meeting, absorbed in a crisis call from his Los Angeles legal team about patent disputes, he had forgotten to remove the sign. For the first time in a week, his carefully maintained routine had failed. Dash stood in the hallway, keycard in his hand, staring at the sign that represented his first mistake since arriving in New York. He could hear movement inside the suite, the soft sounds of efficient work, the person who had been maintaining his space all week while remaining completely invisible to him. For a moment, he considered waiting in the hallway until she finished. That would be the professional thing to do, the boundary-respecting thing. But the LA call was in 20 minutes, and he needed to retrieve his presentation materials from the desk. More than that, though, something deeper compelled him forward. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe just the human desire to finally see the person who had been caring for his space with such obvious attention to detail. Dash slid the key card through the reader and gently pushed open the door. The suite looked exactly as it always did, immaculate, perfectly arranged, every surface gleaming. But now there was life in it, movement and purpose. He could hear soft sounds from the bedroom, the rustle of fresh linens being arranged with practiced skill. He set his briefcase down quietly and moved toward the living area's large windows, his mind still partially focused on the approaching conference call. He was loosening his tie and unbuttoning his collar when he heard footsteps approaching from the bedroom. Dash turned toward the sound, expecting to see one of the older housekeeping staff members he occasionally glimpsed in the hallways. Instead, he found himself looking at a young woman who seemed to embody grace itself. She was beautiful in a way that made his breath catch, not the artificial beauty he was accustomed to in his social circles, but something natural and unstudied. Her dark skin seemed to glow in the afternoon light, streaming through the windows, and her hair was pulled back in a style that was both professional and elegant. She wore the hotel's standard housekeeping uniform, but somehow she made it look dignified, purposeful. But it was her eyes that stopped him completely. They were wide with surprise and embarrassment, but beneath that, he saw intelligence, strength, and something that seemed like recognition, as if she had been wondering about him, just as he had unconsciously been wondering about her. I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but clear. The sign was on the door. "I didn't know that." "No," Dash interrupted, his own voice coming out lower and rougher than intended. "It was my fault. I forgot to remove it." Neither of them moved. The air between them seemed to shimmer with an energy Dash had never experienced before. Electric, dangerous, completely unexpected. He should ask her to come back later. She should excuse herself and leave immediately. They both knew the protocol, the proper boundaries, but instead they stood frozen, studying each other with an intensity that made the spacious suite feel suddenly intimate. For the first time in years, Dashiell Blackthorne found himself completely unprepared for what happened next. Time seemed to suspend itself in the golden afternoon light of Suite 4207. Ava stood frozen in the doorway between the bedroom and living area, her arms full of fresh towels that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Across the room, Dashiell Blackthorne stood silhouetted against the massive windows, his white dress shirt partially unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, his tie hanging loose around his neck. This was him, the mysterious guest she had been invisibly serving for a week, the man whose morning coffee ritual she knew by heart, whose perfectly organized documents she dusted around with careful reverence. But seeing him in person was like discovering that a character from a book had stepped into real life, overwhelming and surreal. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of presence that commanded attention without trying. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, and his eyes, God, his eyes were looking at her with an intensity that made her skin feel electric. These weren't the cold, calculating eyes she had expected from reading about him in discarded business magazines. These eyes held warmth, curiosity, and something that looked dangerously like genuine interest. "You are," he began, taking a step closer without seeming to realize it. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was certain he could hear it across the room. She should apologize again, excuse herself quickly, and disappear back into the invisible world where she belonged. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at her like she was someone worth seeing, kept her rooted to the spot. "Ava," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Evangeline Winters." The way she said her own name surprised her. Usually, she introduced herself simply as housekeeping or gave just her first name. But something about this moment, about the way he was looking at her, made her want to be fully present, fully herself. Dash felt something shift inside his chest as her name settled between them. Evangeline. The name suited her perfectly, elegant, with depth and music in its syllables. He realized he had been holding his breath and forced himself to exhale, but that only made him more aware of her presence, of the subtle scent of vanilla and clean cotton that seemed to surround her. "Evangeline," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. I've wondered about you." The admission surprised them both. Eva's eyes widened, and she clutched the towels tighter against her chest like a shield. "You wondered about me? You've been taking care of this place all week." Dash said, moving another step closer. I could tell someone special was maintaining it. The attention to detail, the way you never disturbed my work but somehow made everything perfect. I could feel your care in every corner of this room. Eva felt heat rise in her cheeks. The idea that he had noticed her work, that he had somehow sensed her presence even in her absence, was both thrilling and terrifying. I was just doing my job. No, Dash shook his head, his voice growing softer. What you do goes beyond any job description. You make this place feel like home. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was prepared to examine. Home. For Dash, who lived in carefully designed spaces that impressed visitors but never comforted him, the concept had become almost foreign. But this suite, touched by Eva's invisible hands, warmed by her care, had indeed begun to feel like sanctuary. Eva's breath caught. She thought about all the small touches she had added without even realizing it. The way she arranged his papers so the family photograph was visible. How she made sure his morning coffee setup was perfect. The extra care she took with his personal belongings. She had been unconsciously nurturing a space for a man she had never met, and somehow he had felt it. I should go, she whispered, but her feet remained planted on the plush carpet. Or should you? Dash asked, and now he was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. The rational part of Eva's mind screamed warnings. This was dangerous territory. A housekeeper getting personally involved with a billionaire guest. She could lose her job, her reputation, her carefully maintained invisibility that kept her safe. But looking into Dash's eyes, she saw something that made all those concerns fade into background noise. She saw loneliness that matched her own. She saw a man who, despite having everything money could buy, was searching for something real, something genuine. She saw recognition, the same spark of connection that was currently setting her entire nervous system on fire. I've never... Eva started, then stopped, shaking her head. Never what? Dash prompted gently. I've never felt anything like this, she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I clean rooms for wealthy people every day, and they never see me. I'm invisible, but you make me feel visible. Something in Dash's expression shifted, becoming more intense, more focused. You are the most visible person I've encountered in years, he said quietly. Everyone else in my world wants something from me. Money, connections, favors. But you've been taking care of me without asking for anything in return. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Before Eva could respond, before either of them could think through the consequences, Dash reached out and gently touched her face. His fingers traced her cheek with reverent softness, as if he were touching something precious and fragile. I've been thinking about you, he admitted, wondering what you looked like, what your voice sounded like, whether you ever thought about the stranger whose space you cared for so beautifully. Ava's eyes fluttered closed at his touch. Every day, she whispered, I thought about you every day. The towels fell from her arms, landing silently on the carpet as Dash stepped closer, eliminating the last inches of space between them. His other hand found her waist, and Ava's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart through the fine fabric of his shirt. This is crazy, Eva breathed. Completely insane, Dash agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip. I could lose my job. I could lose my focus on everything I came here to accomplish. They were so close now that their foreheaths almost touched, their breath mingling in the space between their lips. The afternoon sun painted everything golden, making the moment feel suspended in amber, perfect and untouchable. Eva, Dash whispered her name like a prayer. Yes, I'm going to kiss you now, she nodded, her eyes still closed. Her entire world narrowed down to this moment, this man, this impossible connection that felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. When Dash's lips touched hers, every rational thought Eva had ever possessed simply evaporated. The kiss was everything Eva had never known she was missing. Dash's lips were warm and surprisingly gentle, moving against hers with a tenderness that contradicted everything she thought she knew about powerful men. Her hands fisted in his shirt as he deepened the kiss, and she felt herself melting into him like she was coming home to a place she'd never been, but had always been searching for. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads touching as they tried to process what had just happened. Eva's eyes remained closed, afraid that opening them would make this magical moment disappear like a mirage. "God," Dash whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been wondering what that would feel like for days." Eva's eyes flew open, meeting his gaze. "Days. But we just met." "No." Dash shook his head, his thumb still tracing the line of her jaw. "I've been aware of you since the first day. Little things, the way you arranged my papers so carefully, how you always left my coffee set up perfect, the fact that this room felt different somehow, warmer, cared for. I started looking forward to coming back here in ways I couldn't explain." A flush of pleasure and embarrassment warmed Eva's cheeks. "I noticed things about you too," she admitted quietly. "Your coffee habits, how meticulously organized you are, the photograph on your desk of you and an older man. I shouldn't have looked, but—" "My grandfather," Dash said softly, "Walter Blackthorne. He raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. Eva's heart clenched at the pain that flickered across his features. "I'm sorry. I can see in the photo how much you loved each other. He taught me everything about building something from nothing, about treating people with dignity regardless of their bank account balance." Dash's smile was tinged with sadness. "I think he'd like you." The simple statement hit Eva with unexpected force. The idea that this man, this billionaire who could have anyone, thought his beloved grandfather would approve of her felt like receiving an undeserved gift. "Dash," she whispered, using his name for the first time. It felt intimate, dangerous. "I need to tell you something." He pulled back slightly, concern creasing his brow. "What is it?" Eva took a shaky breath, gathering her courage. "When I said I've never done this before, I wasn't just talking about kissing a guest." Dash waited, giving her space to continue, his hands still gentle on her face. "And I've never felt anything like this for anyone," Eva continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never wanted someone so much that it physically hurt. I've never looked at a man and thought I could lose myself completely in him and be grateful for it. I've never been willing to risk everything I've worked for just to stay in someone's arms for 5 more minutes." Dash's expression grew more intense, his eyes searching her face as if he were trying to memorize every detail. "Eva, I'm 23 years old," she rushed on, afraid that if she stopped, she'd lose her nerve. "I've had exactly 2 boyfriends, both relationships that lasted less than 6 months, because I was always holding part of myself back. I told myself it was because I was focused on work, on taking care of my grandmother, on building a stable life, but the truth is I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For this." Eva gestured between them, her eyes filling with tears she hadn't expected. "For someone who would see me, really see me, not just as the help or as someone convenient or temporary, for someone who would make me want to be brave enough to be completely honest about who I am and what I feel." Dash's hands framed her face more firmly, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "Eva, you're the most honest person I've met in years. Do you know how rare that is in my world? How precious?" "But that's just it," Eva said, pulling back slightly. "Your world. I don't belong in it, Dash. I'm a housekeeper from Brooklyn who takes the subway to work and counts every dollar. You're a billionaire who flies private jets and makes decisions that affect thousands of people. This is crazy." "Maybe," Dash admitted, his voice steady, but his eyes fierce. "But I haven't felt this alive in years. Every day since I arrived in New York has been about business, about deals and negotiations and maintaining the perfect image. But being here with you, right now, I feel like myself again, like the person I was before I built all these walls around my life." Eva studied his face, seeing the vulnerability he was showing her, the way he was lowering his carefully maintained defenses. "Ah, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I came to New York for 15 days to close some business deals and get back to my controlled life in Los Angeles. But now—" Dash paused, seeming to wrestle with his own words. "Now I can't imagine getting on that plane knowing I'll never see you again." The confession hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were brave enough to cross. Eva felt her heart racing as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just attraction or a moment of weakness. This was the beginning of something that could change both their lives forever. "I'm scared," Eva whispered. "So am I," Dash admitted. "I've built my entire adult life around avoiding exactly this kind of complication. But Eva, looking at you right now, I think maybe complications aren't always bad things. Maybe sometimes they're just life trying to give us something we didn't know we needed." Eva's hands moved up to cover his, pressing his palms more firmly against her cheeks. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with someone like you. And I don't know how to be with someone who sees through all my carefully constructed walls," Dash replied. But maybe we can figure it out together." Before Eva could respond, her work phone buzzed in her pocket, a reminder that the real world still existed outside this golden bubble they'd created. She reluctantly pulled away to check it, and her face paled as she read the message. "What is it?" Dash asked immediately. "My supervisor. She's looking for me. I've been in here too long." Eva looked around at the scattered towels on the floor, the cleaning cart abandoned in the hallway. "I have to go." "Eva, wait!" But she was already moving, gathering the fallen towels with shaking hands, her professional instincts warring with her desire to stay wrapped in his arms forever. "I'll come back," she said quickly, not looking at him because she was afraid she'd lose her resolve. "Tonight, after my shift ends at 8. If you want me to." "Eva." Dash's voice stopped her at the door. When she turned back, his expression was so tender it nearly undid her completely. "I'll be waiting." Eva's hands trembled as she swiped her employee card at the staff entrance of the Grand Manhattan at 8:47 p.m. The hotel's evening shift had just begun, and the hallways hummed with the quiet efficiency of night operations. She had changed out of her housekeeping uniform into her own clothes, a simple navy dress that was her nicest outfit, though she was painfully aware it probably cost less than Dash's tie. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. Eva caught her reflection in the polished brass doors and barely recognized herself. Her eyes were bright with nervous energy, her cheeks flushed with anticipation and terror in equal measure. She had spent the last 4 hours trying to talk herself out of coming back, listing all the rational reasons why this was a mistake. But every time she tried to convince herself to go home to her small Brooklyn apartment, she remembered the way Dash had looked at her, like she was something precious, something worth risking everything for. No one had ever looked at her that way before. The hallway was eerily quiet, lit by elegant sconces that cast golden pools of light on the marble floors. Eva's footsteps seemed impossibly loud as she approached suite 4207, her heart hammering so hard she wondered if her ribs might crack under the pressure. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she doing? She was about to voluntarily enter a world she didn't understand, with a man who could destroy her life with a single phone call. But before doubt could paralyze her completely, the door opened. Dash stood there in dark jeans and a simple white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up, collar open. He looked younger somehow, less intimidating without the armor of his business attire, but his eyes held the same intensity that had captured her that afternoon. "You came," he said softly, relief evident in his voice. "You thought I wouldn't?" Eva asked, surprised by her own boldness. "I hoped you would, but I also know I'm asking you to take a huge risk." Dash stepped aside to let her enter. "I've been thinking about that all evening." The suite looked different in the evening light, more intimate, warmer. The city sparkled beyond the windows like a field of stars, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Eva noticed a bottle of wine on the coffee table alongside what looked like takeout containers from an expensive restaurant. "Do you order dinner?" she asked, touched by the gesture. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten," Dash said, suddenly seeming uncertain. "I got it from Maria, Italian, but if you don't like Italian, I can order something else, or if you prefer to go out somewhere." Dash, Eva's soft interruption stopped his nervous rambling. "It's perfect." They stood facing each other in the elegant living room, both acutely aware that everything had changed since their afternoon encounter. The easy conversation from earlier felt more complicated now, weighed down by the magnitude of what they were attempting. "This is weird, isn't it?" Eva said with a nervous laugh. "I feel like I should ask permission to sit on your furniture." Dash's expression grew serious. "Eva, I need you to understand something. When you're here with me, you're not the hotel employee, and I'm not the guest. We're just us. Two people trying to figure out if this incredible thing between us is real." Eva felt some of her tension ease. "And is it real, I mean?" Instead of answering with words, Dash moved closer, his hand finding hers. "What do you think?" The simple touch sent electricity shooting up Eva's arm. Even this small contact felt charged with possibility, dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. "And I think," Eva said quietly, "that I've never felt anything this intense in my life, and I think that terrifies me." "Me too," Dash admitted. "I've spent the last 12 years building a life where everything is predictable, controllable. And then you walk into my room and suddenly nothing makes sense anymore." They moved to the sofa, sitting close enough to touch but not quite touching, the space between them humming with tension. Dash opened the wine, a bottle that Eva suspected cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and poured 2 glasses. "Tell me about your life," Dash said as he handed her the wine. "The real parts, not just the work." Eva took a sip, surprised by how smooth and rich it tasted. "There's not much excitement to tell. I grew up in Brooklyn with my grandmother after my parents died in a factory accident when I was 12. Grandma Rose worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, but she always made sure I stayed in school. She's the strongest person I know." "Is she the reason you work so hard?" "Partly. She's diabetic now, and the medications are expensive. But it's more than that." Eva paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want to prove that someone like me can build something meaningful, you know? That growing up poor doesn't mean you're destined to stay that way." Dash studied her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "And what does something meaningful look like to you?" "I'm studying business management at community college, part-time, which is why it's taking forever. Eventually, I want to open my own cleaning service, high-end, but with fair wages and benefits for employees. I want to show that you can treat workers well and still be successful." The passion in Eva's voice as she talked about her dreams made something shift in Dash's chest. Here was a woman who understood the value of hard work, who wanted to build something that would lift others up along with herself. It was everything his grandfather had taught him, everything he'd somehow lost sight of in his pursuit of endless expansion. "That's incredible," he said quietly. "And it's exactly the kind of business that changes industries." Eva looked surprised. "You really think so?" "I know so, Eva. What you're describing isn't just a business plan. It's a mission. The best companies are built by people who want to solve real problems, who care about more than just profit margins." They talked through dinner, the conversation flowing more easily as the wine relaxed their nerves. Eva told him about her grandmother's stories of immigrating from Jamaica, about her struggles with college while working full-time, about her dreams of creating something lasting. Dash shared stories about his grandfather's electronics shop, about learning to fix radios and televisions as a child, about the loneliness that had driven him to build higher and higher walls around his success. "Can I ask you something?" Eva said as they finished eating. "Why me?" "You could have anyone. Supermodels, actresses, women who understand your world. Why are you here with a housekeeper from Brooklyn?" Dash was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Because those other women want the billionaire. They want the lifestyle, the status, the access. But when you look at me, I feel like you see the person I used to be. The person I want to be again. And who is that person? Someone who cares more about building something meaningful than just accumulating more wealth. Someone who remembers that success isn't worth much if you don't have anyone real to share it with. Dash set down his glass and turned to face her fully. Eva, in one afternoon, you've made me feel more like myself than I have in years. The vulnerability in his voice made Eva's chest tight with emotion. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I see you, she whispered, the real you. When Dash kissed her this time, it was deeper, more desperate than their first kiss. Eva could taste the wine on his lips, could feel the barely controlled intensity in the way his hands tangled in her hair. This wasn't just attraction anymore. This was the beginning of something that could consume them both. Eva woke up in her own bed the next morning with the taste of expensive wine still on her lips and the memory of Dash's hands in her hair. She had left his suite at midnight, both of them knowing that staying longer would have crossed a line neither was quite ready to navigate. But the kisses they had shared, the way he had held her face like she was something precious, those memories made her entire body feel electric. Her phone buzzed with a text from her grandmother. How was work yesterday, baby girl? You seemed different when you called. Eva smiled despite her exhaustion. Grandma Rose had always been able to read her moods, even through phone calls. Just tired. Grandma, long day. Came the response. That didn't sound like tired to me. That sounded like something interesting happened. Before Eva could craft a response that wasn't a complete lie, her work phone rang. Carmen's voice was tense on the other end. Eva, girl, you need to get here early today. Mrs. Harrison wants to see you in her office at 9 sharp. Eva's stomach dropped. Mrs. Harrison was the head of housekeeping, a stern woman in her 50s who had worked at the Grand Manhattan for over 20 years. She rarely called individual staff members to her office unless something was seriously wrong. Did she say what it was about? Eva asked, already reaching for her uniform. No, but she looked mad, really mad. Just be careful, okay? The subway ride to Manhattan felt endless. Eva's mind raced through possibilities. Had someone seen her entering Dash's suite after hours? Had a guest complained? Had she made some mistake in her work that she wasn't aware of? By the time she reached Mrs. Harrison's cramped office in the hotel's basement, Eva's palms were sweating. The older woman looked up from her paperwork with an expression that could have frozen fire. Sit down, Evangeline. The use of her full name instead of the usual Eva or Winters was not a good sign. I received an interesting phone call this morning, Mrs. Harrison continued, her voice clipped, from a guest services manager who noticed some irregularities in our system. Eva's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. What kind of irregularities? Your keycard was used to access the 42nd floor at 8:47 p.m. last night. Care to explain why you were in the hotel after your shift ended? The question hung in the air like a trap. Eva knew that lying would only make things worse, but telling the truth could destroy everything. I realized I had forgotten to replace towels in one of the suites, Eva said carefully. I came back to finish the job properly. Mrs. Harrison's eyes narrowed. Which suite? 4207. The Blackthorn suite. Mrs. Harrison leaned back in her chair, studying Eva with the intensity of a hawk examining prey. And this urgent towel replacement took you 3 hours? Eva felt heat rise in her cheeks. There was no good explanation for why she had been in the hotel that long. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. Mr. Blackthorn is an important guest. Indeed he is, which is why I find it very curious that you would choose to visit his suite during personal time. Mrs. Harrison pulled out a folder and opened it. Evangeline, in your 18 months working here, you have been exemplary. Perfect attendance, no complaints, consistently high performance reviews. That's why I'm going to ask you directly. Is there something inappropriate happening between you and Mr. Blackthorn? The directness of the question hit Eva like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to deny it, but no words came out. How could she explain that what was happening between her and Dash felt like the most appropriate thing in her life, even though she knew how it looked to the outside world? "I thought so," Mrs. Harrison said grimly. "Evangeline, you're young, so I'm going to explain something to you once. Guests like Mr. Blackthorne live in a different universe than people like us. They don't form meaningful relationships with hotel staff. They have entertainment, diversions, ways to pass time, and when they leave, which they always do, the staff member is left with nothing but a ruined reputation and no job." Each word felt like a knife twisting in Eva's chest, not because Mrs. Harrison was being cruel, but because part of what she was saying echoed Eva's own deepest fears. "I'm not involved with Mr. Blackthorne," Eva said quietly, hating herself for the lie. "Good. Because I'm implementing some changes to ensure it stays that way. You're being reassigned to the 28th floor, effective immediately. Carmen will take over the penthouse circuit." "Mrs. Harrison, please, this is not a punishment, Evangeline. This is me protecting your career. The 28th floor serves corporate clients, professional business travelers. It's steady work with good tips and no complications." Eva stared at the folder in Mrs. Harrison's hands, understanding that her entire world was being rearranged with a few simple sentences. No more cleaning Dash's suite. No more glimpses into his world. No more legitimate reason to be on the 42nd floor. "When does this start?" Eva asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Today, Carmen is already handling your former route." Mrs. Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Evangeline, I know this feels harsh, but I've seen too many good employees lose everything because they confused fantasy with reality. Don't let that be you." Eva nodded numbly and left the office, her mind reeling. As she gathered her supplies for her new assignment, Carmen appeared at her side. "I'm sorry, girl," Carmen said quietly. "I tried to cover for you, but someone saw you going up to the executive floors last night. Mrs. Harrison had to do something." "I know," Eva replied. "It's not your fault." But as she pushed her cart toward the 28th floor, Eva felt like she was walking away from more than just a work assignment. She was walking away from the first real happiness she had felt in years. Meanwhile, 42 floors above, Dash was pacing his suite with growing concern. It was past 2 p.m., and the housekeeping sign he had carefully placed on his door remained untouched. For a week, Eva had been as reliable as clockwork. Her absence felt ominous. When a different housekeeper, an older woman who introduced herself as Carmen, finally arrived, Dash tried to ask casually about Eva's whereabouts. "Oh, Evangeline got reassigned," Carmen said matter-of-factly as she began changing the sheets. "Management shuffle. Happens all the time." But Dash caught something in her tone, a careful neutrality that suggested there was more to the story. As Carmen worked with professional efficiency, but none of Eva's subtle personal touches, Dash realized that his carefully controlled world was about to become a lot more complicated. Because losing Eva wasn't just about missing her presence in his room. It was about losing the first real connection he had felt in years, and he wasn't prepared to accept that without a fight. The question was, how do you fight for someone when the entire system is designed to keep you apart? 3 days, 3 agonizing days of Dash waiting for Eva to appear, checking his phone obsessively for messages that never came, and trying to focus on business meetings while his mind remained fixed on a woman who seemed to have vanished from his world entirely. Carmen continued to service his suite with professional competence, but the room felt cold now, sterile. Gone were the subtle personal touches that had made the space feel like home. The way Eva arranged his papers so the family photograph was perfectly visible, the particular care she took with his coffee setup, the almost invisible signs that someone who cared had been there. "Carmen," Dash said on Thursday afternoon, catching the older woman as she prepared to leave. "The other housekeeper who was assigned to this floor, Evangeline. Is she all right?" Carmen paused in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "She's fine, Mr. Blackthorne, just working a different section of the hotel now. Could you give her a message for me?" "I'm sorry, sir, but we're not supposed to pass personal messages between guests and staff. Hotel policy." The policy was obviously designed to prevent exactly the situation Dash found himself in. But that didn't make it any less frustrating. After Carmen left, he found himself staring at his phone, considering options that all seemed either inappropriate or impossible. He could call the hotel's main desk and ask to be transferred to housekeeping, but that would only create more problems for Eva. He could try to find her in the employee areas, but his presence there would cause a scene and potentially get her fired. Every avenue seemed blocked by protocols designed to maintain the invisible barriers between his world and hers. That evening, Dash made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of staying in his suite or attending another business dinner, he walked out of the Grand Manhattan and began exploring the surrounding neighborhoods. If he couldn't find Eva through official channels, maybe he could find her in the real world. Manhattan's evening energy swirled around him as he walked. Street vendors calling out their wares, couples hurrying to dinner reservations, the endless symphony of car horns and conversation that made the city feel alive. But Dash barely noticed any of it. His mind was focused on what Eva had told him about her life. Brooklyn, community college, taking care of her grandmother. It wasn't much to go on, but it was something. The next morning, instead of heading straight to his scheduled meetings, Dash did something he hadn't done in years. He cancelled everything and drove to Brooklyn. His driver, Marcus, looked puzzled when given the address of the community college Eva had mentioned, but he navigated the unfamiliar streets without comment. Brooklyn College sprawled across a modest campus that was worlds away from the Ivy League institutions Dash was accustomed to visiting for board meetings and recruitment events. Students hurried between buildings with the focused energy of people juggling work and study, and Dash felt oddly out of place in his tailored suit. He spent an hour walking the campus, hoping to catch a glimpse of Eva between classes, but the effort felt futile. Even if she was there, the chances of randomly encountering her were minimal, and more importantly, showing up at her school felt like a violation of her privacy, a reminder of the power imbalance that already complicated everything between them. Disappointed and feeling foolish, Dash was heading back to his car when he heard a familiar voice. "Excuse me, are you Dashiell Blackthorne?" He turned to see a young woman approaching, not Eva, but someone who clearly knew who he was. She was probably in her early 20s, with curious eyes and the kind of direct manner that suggested she wasn't easily intimidated. "Yes," Dash replied cautiously. "I'm Keisha, Eva's study partner in our business management class. She's mentioned you." Dash's heart jumped. "She has." "Well, not by name exactly. But she's been different this week. Distracted, sad. And when I saw your picture in a business magazine yesterday, I put two and two together." Keisha studied him with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "You're the reason she's been miserable, aren't you?" The accusation hit Dash like a physical blow. "I never meant to make her miserable." "But you did. Ava's the strongest person I know, but she's been walking around like someone stole her favorite memory. So what I want to know is, what are you planning to do about it?" Dash found himself in the surreal position of being confronted by a college student about his romantic intentions, but something about Keisha's fierce protectiveness of Eva made him respect her immediately. "I'm trying to find her," he admitted. The hotel has policies that prevent us from communicating, and I don't have her personal contact information." "Of course you don't. Eva's careful like that." Keisha tilted her head, studying him more intently. "You really care about her, don't you? This isn't just some rich guy playing games." "It's not games," Dash said quietly. "Eva is. She's the most real person I've met in years. Being with her makes me remember who I used to be, who I want to be again." Keisha was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. Eva works at the hotel until 4. Then she has class here from 6 to 8 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But today's Friday, so she'll be going straight home to Brooklyn after work to spend the evening with her grandmother. She does that every Friday without fail. We're in Brooklyn. I'm not giving you her home address, Keisha said firmly, but there's a small cafe called Rosa's on Ocean Avenue where she always stops to pick up her grandmother's favorite pastries on Friday evenings. If you happen to be there around 5:30, Dash felt hope flicker in his chest for the first time in days. And Keisha, why are you helping me? Because Eva's been taking care of everyone else her whole life, and maybe it's time someone took care of her for a change. But I'm warning you, if you hurt her, if you're just playing some kind of rich boy fantasy, I will make your life very complicated. I'm studying business law, and I know exactly how to make powerful people uncomfortable. Despite everything, Dash found himself smiling. Eva's lucky to have a friend like you. She is, and you better be worthy of having a woman like her interested in you. As Dash drove back toward Manhattan, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, nervousness about seeing someone who mattered to him. Eva had every right to be angry with him for showing up in her world uninvited. She might want nothing to do with him after what his presence in her life had already cost her, but he had to try. Because losing Eva felt like losing the best part of himself, and he wasn't ready to accept that without a fight. At 5:15 p.m., Dash found himself standing outside Rosa's cafe in Brooklyn, his heart pounding like he was 16 again and asking someone to prom. Through the window, he could see the warm, intimate space filled with the kind of authentic neighborhood energy that money couldn't buy. Now all he had to do was wait for Eva to appear and hope that she would give him a chance to explain why finding her again was the most important thing he had ever done. Eva pushed through the glass door of Rosa's cafe with the weight of the world on her shoulders. The familiar scent of fresh bread and coffee that usually comforted her felt muted, filtered through the emotional exhaustion that had been her constant companion for the past 3 days. She moved through the routine mechanically, ordering her grandmother's favorite almond pastries, exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Rosa behind the counter, while her mind remained trapped in memories of a man she was supposed to forget. The usual for Grandma Rose, Mrs. Rosa asked with a warm smile that reminded Eva why this place had become their Friday tradition. Yes, please, and maybe add an extra guava pastry. It's been a hard week. As Mrs. Rosa packed the pastries into a familiar white box, Eva allowed herself a moment of self-pity. 3 days ago, she had been floating on the possibility of something magical. Now she was back to her regular life, but everything felt diminished, like someone had turned down the brightness on her world. She was reaching for her wallet when she saw him. Dashiell Blackthorne sat at a small table near the window, completely out of place in his expensive suit among the cafe's mismatched chairs and local artwork. He wasn't looking at his phone or working on a laptop like the billionaire she knew him to be. Instead, he was simply sitting there, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the door with an expression of barely contained hope. Eva's heart stopped, then began racing so fast she felt dizzy. Her first instinct was to run, to grab the pastries and escape before he saw her, but it was too late. Their eyes met across the small cafe, and she saw relief flood his features so completely that it took her breath away. He stood slowly, as if sudden movements might spook her, and Eva became acutely aware that everyone in the cafe was now watching them with undisguised curiosity. In Brooklyn, billionaires were as rare as unicorns, and Dash's presence had not gone unnoticed. Eva, he said her name like a prayer answered, taking a tentative step toward her. What are you doing here? The words came out sharper than she intended, but seeing him in her neighborhood, in her safe space, made her feel exposed and vulnerable in ways she wasn't prepared for. Looking for you. Dash stopped a few feet away, respecting her space, but close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the hint of desperation he was trying to hide. We need to talk. No, we don't. Eva grabbed the pastry box from Mrs. Rosa, who was watching the exchange with fascination. We have nothing to talk about. Eva, please. Please, what? Eva's voice rose slightly, drawing even more attention. Please let you explain how I lost my assignment because someone saw me with you. Please let you tell me how this was all just some fantasy that got out of hand. The pain in her voice made Dash flinch. But it wasn't a fantasy. What happened between us was the most real thing I've felt in years. Real enough to cost me my job security. Real enough to make my supervisor think I'm the kind of person who would compromise my integrity for a wealthy guest. Eva's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Do you have any idea what it's like to have someone question your character because you were stupid enough to believe that someone like you could actually care about someone like me? Someone like you? Dash's voice grew sharper. Eva, you're talking about yourself like you're less than me somehow, and that's not... Isn't it? Eva interrupted, her composure finally cracking. Dash, look around. Look where we are. This is my world. A neighborhood cafe where a $5 pastry is a treat, where people work 2 jobs to make rent, where dreaming about someone in a 42nd floor suite is just setting yourself up for heartbreak. The cafe had gone completely silent now, other customers no longer pretending not to listen. Eva could feel their stares like physical weight, and the humiliation of having this conversation in public made her anger burn brighter. You want to know what the last 3 days have been like for me? Eva continued, her voice trembling with emotion. I've been cleaning corporate rooms on the 28th floor, listening to my co-workers whisper about why I got reassigned, wondering if my supervisor is going to find some excuse to fire me completely. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I keep thinking about you, about what it felt like to be with you, and hating myself for missing something that was never really mine to begin with. Dash looked stricken. Eva, I never wanted any of that to happen. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Eva's composure shattered completely. Sorry doesn't give me back my reputation or my peace of mind. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you live in a world where consequences don't stick to you, where you can walk away from this and go back to your life like nothing happened, while I'm left trying to rebuild mine. You think I can just walk away? Dash's own control was fraying now, his voice rising to match hers. Eva, I've spent 3 days barely able to function because you disappeared from my life. I cancelled meetings. I drove to Brooklyn. I've been going out of my mind trying to find you because the thought of never seeing you again was unbearable. Then you should have thought about that before you put me in an impossible situation. I didn't know it would create problems for you. If I had known, you would have what? Been more careful. Made sure no one saw us. Eva laughed bitterly. That's exactly my point, Dash. You didn't think about the consequences because you don't have to. People like you never do. The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier. Dash stood there, his face pale, and Eva could see that her words had hit their mark. But instead of the satisfaction she expected to feel, she only felt hollow. You're right, Dash said quietly, his voice barely audible over the cafe's ambient noise. You're absolutely right. I was selfish. I was so caught up in how you made me feel that I didn't think about what being with me might cost you. And I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. The genuine remorse in his voice made Eva's anger waver, but she couldn't let herself soften, not when she was still so raw, so hurt. I have to go, she said, clutching the pastry box like a shield. My grandmother is waiting for me. Eva, wait. Dash reached out as if to touch her arm, then stopped himself. Can I ask you something? Against her better judgment, Eva paused. Did any of it mean anything to you? The time we spent together, the things we talked about, was any of it real for you? The question broke something inside Eva's chest. She looked at this man who had turned her world upside down, who had made her feel seen and valued and special, and who had also reminded her in the cruelest way possible of the barriers that separated their worlds. It meant everything to me, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears, and that's exactly why it has to end. Before Dash could respond, Eva pushed past him and out the cafe door, leaving him standing among the curious stares of strangers in a neighborhood that would never be his. But as she walked rapidly toward her grandmother's apartment, Eva couldn't shake the image of his face when she told him it had to end. He had looked like a man who had just lost something irreplaceable. The problem was, she felt exactly the same way. Eva sat on her grandmother's worn but comfortable sofa, mechanically eating a guava pastry while Rose Winters studied her with the keen perception that came from 7 decades of reading people's hearts. "On dit, baby girl," Grandma Rose said gently, her Jamaican accent still strong after 40 years in Brooklyn. "You going to tell me what's really troubling you, or do I have to guess?" Eva looked up at the woman who had raised her, whose weathered hands told stories of hard work and sacrifice, whose eyes held more wisdom than any textbook Eva had ever studied. At 74, Rose Winters was still the strongest person Eva knew, and right now, Eva desperately needed that strength. "There's this man, Grandma," Eva began hesitantly. "Ah," Rose settled back in her chair with a knowing smile. "I wondered when this day would come. Tell me about him." So Eva did. She told her grandmother about Dash, about the impossible connection they had shared, about the job complications and the confrontation at Rosa's cafe just hours earlier. She left out some of the more intimate details, but she laid bare her confusion, her pain, and her certainty that anything between them was doomed. When Eva finished, Rose was quiet for a long moment, her arthritic fingers working at the edge of her shawl, a habit Eva recognized as her grandmother's way of processing difficult emotions. "You know," Rose finally said, "your grandfather was different from me too." Eva looked up in surprise. She rarely heard stories about her grandfather, who had died when Eva was very young. Different how? Winston came from a family with money, not rich like your billionaire, but comfortable. His parents had education, property, expectations. When he told them he wanted to marry a housekeeper's daughter who barely finished school, Rose shook her head with a rueful smile. "They said the same things you're thinking now. That we were from different worlds, that it couldn't work, that he was throwing his life away." What happened? Winston told them that love doesn't recognize class distinctions, and that any family who couldn't accept the woman he chose wasn't worth having. Rose's eyes grew distant with memory. "Took them 5 years to come around, but eventually they did. By the time you were born, they couldn't imagine their lives without you in it." Eva felt tears prick her eyes. "But Grandma, that's different. Grandpa's family had money, but they weren't billionaires. The gap between Dash and me is enormous." "Child, you think the size of the gap matters more than the size of the love?" Rose leaned forward, taking Eva's hands in hers. "From what you've told me, this man cancelled important meetings to look for you. He drove to Brooklyn, a place that probably feels like another planet to him, just to find you. That doesn't sound like someone playing games. But what about the practical things? What about the fact that his world will never accept someone like me? And what about the fact that his world might be exactly what needs someone like you in it?" Rose's voice grew firmer. "Eva, you've spent your whole life believing that working hard and being good is enough, but that you have to stay in your place while you do it. What if that place is too small for who you're meant to become?" Before Eva could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart jumped as she read it. "Eva, this is Keisha. I gave your number to someone who needed it. Don't be mad at me. Check your email." Eva's hands trembled as she opened her email app. At the top of her inbox was a message from an address she didn't recognize, but the subject line made her breath catch. "A proposal worth considering. Dear Eva, I know you told me to stay away, and I respect that. But before I leave New York tomorrow, I need you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. You made me remember what my grandfather taught me about building something meaningful, about treating people with dignity, about using success to lift others up instead of just accumulating more for myself. I can't undo the problems I created for your job, but maybe I can create a solution that serves us both." I'm starting a new foundation focused on providing business education and startup funding for working-class entrepreneurs. People like you who have incredible ideas but lack access to capital and networks. I want you to consider being the executive director. This isn't charity, and it's not some elaborate scheme to get you back. The salary would be $120,000 annually, with full benefits and equity participation. You would have complete autonomy to run the foundation according to your vision. The only requirement is that you use your experience, your understanding of what it means to work hard for everything you have, to help others who are fighting the same battles. I'm attaching a formal business proposal. Read it, consider it, and know that whether you take this job or not, whether I ever see you again or not, you've already given me the greatest gift possible. You reminded me of who I want to be. If you're interested, we can meet tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the Foundation's new offices at 425 Fifth Avenue, 15th floor. If you're not there, I'll understand, and I'll never contact you again. But Ava, I hope you'll be there, not for me, but for yourself. And for all the people whose lives you could change. Yours, P.S. I've already spoken to Mrs. Harrison at the hotel. Your reassignment had nothing to do with performance issues, and you're welcome to return to any position you choose. She also mentioned that several guests have specifically requested you for their suites. You're not invisible, Eva. You never were. Eva stared at the screen, her mind racing. The attached business proposal was detailed, professional, and exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamed about but never thought possible. More than that, it was a chance to help other people like herself, people who worked hard but lacked advantages, who had dreams but needed someone to believe in them. "What is it, baby?" Rose asked gently. Ava handed her grandmother the phone and watched as Rose read the message, her eyebrows rising higher with each paragraph. "Well," Rose said finally, passing the phone back, "seems like your billionaire is more than just a pretty face. Grandma, what should I do?" Rose was quiet for a long moment, studying Eva's face with the intensity of someone making an important decision. "Eva, I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion, trying to build a life that's just good enough. You've been so focused on surviving that you've forgotten about thriving." Rose reached out and cupped Ava's face gently. "This man is offering you a chance to do more than just improve your own life. He's offering you a chance to change other people's lives too. Isn't that what you've always wanted? But what if it doesn't work out between us personally? What if I take this job and then everything falls apart? Then you'll still have changed people's lives, and you'll still be the executive director of a foundation that does important work." Rose smiled. "Baby girl, you can't control what happens between you and this man, but you can control whether you let fear stop you from becoming who you're meant to be." Eva looked down at the email again, reading Dash's words more carefully. He was right. This wasn't about charity or manipulation. This was about recognizing her potential and giving her the tools to fulfill it. More than that, it was about trust. He was trusting her with something important, something that mattered to him. And maybe, just maybe, she could trust him with her heart. "I think," Eva said slowly, "I need to go shopping for interview clothes." Rose's smile was radiant. "Now that's my granddaughter talking." Eva stood outside 425 Fifth Avenue at 9:55 a.m., wearing her best dress, a simple black sheath she had bought for her community college graduation, and carrying a portfolio folder that contained her business plan for the cleaning service she had dreamed of starting. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked up at the gleaming building that housed some of Manhattan's most prestigious businesses. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt both eternal and too short. When the doors opened, Eva found herself facing a reception area that was elegant but not intimidating, professional but warm. A bronze plaque on the wall read, "Blackthorn Foundation, Empowering Working-Class Entrepreneurs." "Ms. Winters?" A young woman behind the reception desk smiled warmly. "Mr. Blackthorn is waiting for you in the conference room." "Right this way." Eva followed her down a hallway lined with photographs of small businesses, a auto repair shop, a bakery, a daycare center, each one accompanied by a small placard telling the story of its owner's journey from dream to reality. By the time they reached the conference room, Eva understood that this wasn't some hastily thrown-together gesture. This was real. Dash stood when she entered, and Eva's breath caught at the sight of him. He looked different somehow, more relaxed, more genuine. Gone was the armor of the perfect billionaire, replaced by something that seemed more like the man she had glimpsed in their private moments together. "Eva," he said softly, "thank you for coming. Thank you for this." Eva gestured around the room, where the conference table was set with coffee, pastries from Rosa's cafe, and several neatly organized stacks of documents. "When did you have time to put all this together?" "I've been working on the foundation idea for months, but I couldn't figure out what it should focus on or who should run it. Meeting you gave me both answers." Dash moved closer, but maintained a respectful distance. "Eva, I meant every word in that email. This is a real offer for a real job, regardless of what happens between us personally." Eva nodded, setting her portfolio on the table. "And I brought my business plan, the one I've been working on for 2 years. I'd love to see it, but first I owe you an apology that's more than just words." Dash picked up a tablet from the conference table and handed it to Eva. On the screen was an email thread between him and Mrs. Harrison at the Grand Manhattan. "I spoke with your supervisor yesterday. I explained that our interaction was entirely my fault, that I had asked you to return after hours to discuss a business opportunity, and that any violation of hotel policy was due to my poor communication, not your misconduct." Eva's eyes widened as she read the exchange. Mrs. Harrison's responses showed a complete reversal of tone, from suspicion to apology. "She wants you back on the penthouse circuit immediately, with a formal commendation for your professionalism under difficult circumstances, and—" Dash paused, looking almost embarrassed. "I may have mentioned that the foundation would be partnering with the hotel for job training programs, contingent on their commitment to treating all employees with dignity and respect." "You used your influence to help me," Eva said quietly. "I used my influence the way my grandfather taught me to solve problems and lift people up, not to create more barriers." Dash's voice grew more earnest. "Eva, I can't undo the pain I caused you, but I can try to build something better going forward." Eva looked around the conference room again, really seeing it this time. The foundation wasn't just an idea. It was a mission that aligned perfectly with everything she had ever wanted to accomplish. More than that, it was a chance to help other people avoid the struggles she had faced, to create opportunities for those who had been told their dreams were too big for their circumstances. "Tell me about the job," she said. For the next hour, they went through the foundation's mission, structure, and goals. Eva's business plan fit perfectly into their framework, and Dash listened to her ideas with the kind of focused attention that made her feel valued and heard. This wasn't charity, this was partnership. "There's one more thing," Dash said as they finished reviewing the documents. "The foundation is funded by a trust that ensures its independence. Even if something happened to me, even if we never spoke again after today, your position and the foundation's mission would be secure. You'd never have to worry about your career depending on my personal feelings." The thoughtfulness of that protection took Eva's breath away. He had anticipated her fears and addressed them before she even had to voice them. "Why?" she asked. "Why go to all this trouble for someone you barely know?" Dash was quiet for a long moment, looking out the conference room's windows at the city sprawling below them. "Because knowing you, even for those brief moments, reminded me that success without purpose is just accumulation. You make me want to be the man my grandfather raised me to be." He turned back to her, his eyes steady and sincere. "And because I'm hoping that maybe, if I prove I can be worthy of your trust professionally, you might consider giving me a chance to prove myself personally too." Eva felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. This man had listened to her fears, understood her concerns, and created solutions that honored both their feelings and their practical realities. More than that, he had shown her that love didn't have to mean compromise or sacrifice. It could mean growth, opportunity, and building something bigger than either of them could achieve alone. "I have conditions," Ava said finally. "Name them." "First, I want to start a mentorship program that pairs successful business owners with aspiring entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. Real mentorship, not just networking events." "Done." "Second, I want the foundation to provide not just funding, but also practical support, help with business plans, legal advice, accounting services, the things that people like me never have access to." "Absolutely." "And third," Eva took a deep breath, "I want to take this slowly. The job, yes, but whatever might happen between us personally, I need time to trust that this is real." Dash's smile was radiant. "Eva, I've waited 31 years to feel the way I feel when I'm with you. I can wait as long as you need." 6 months later, Eva stood in the same conference room, now decorated with success stories from the Foundation's first cohort of entrepreneurs. The Blackthorn Foundation had funded 12 new businesses, created 47 jobs, and changed dozens of lives. More importantly, it had changed Eva's life in ways she was still discovering. Dash appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee, hers with cream and sugar, his black, just the way they had learned each other's preferences during their weekly working dinners that had slowly evolved into something more personal. "Ready for the board meeting?" he asked, handing her the coffee. "Ready," Eva replied, accepting both the coffee and the gentle kiss he pressed to her forehead. They had indeed taken it slowly, building trust through shared work and common values before exploring the deeper connection that had sparked between them from the very beginning. What they had now was stronger for having been tested, more real for having been questioned. As they walked together toward the boardroom where Eva would present her expansion plans to some of the most powerful people in New York, she reflected on how much had changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer confined to the margins of other people's lives. She was building something meaningful, creating opportunities for others, and allowing herself to be loved by someone who saw her true worth. The elevator doors opened to reveal their future, uncertain in its details, but solid in its foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had grown stronger by being honest about the challenges it faced. Eva Winters, Executive Director of the Blackthorn Foundation, stepped into that future with confidence, knowing that sometimes the most impossible dreams are just waiting for someone brave enough to make them real. The end. If you were in Eva's shoes, would you have accepted the foundation offer? Or do you believe that true love shouldn't mix feelings with professional opportunities? Some would say she was brave, others that she was naive. What do you think? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.